Hi, everyone, and good morning. I'm so sorry. I know one of the best parts of gatherings like this are like the interstitial moments, the moments between all of the speakers, but here we are. And we're going to lose Oren at 9:30 because he has to go do something on the Hill. Very important. And so we want to capitalize on his time. So welcome. I'm Rabbi Shira Stutman. And actually, I can't introduce this panel any better than Leslie and Rabbi Rory and Amy just did a moment ago, which is to say that we stand at the intersection right now between urgency and possibility. You know, the purpose of this day is to talk about coalition and bridge building. And the people you have in front of you are some of the people actually doing the research as to what is actually happening on the ground, and then doing the work as to how we can build a different future than the one we have right now. So let me introduce them to you. Right here to my left, I feel like most of these people need no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway, is Mark Hetfield, who is the president and CEO of HIAS, who also an organization that needs no introduction, but Mark speaks to how anti-Semitism and anti-immigrant sentiment often grow from the same poisonous roots, but how we can push back by standing up for the vulnerable, including refugees and asylum seekers. Next to Mark is Ilana Kaufman, who is the CEO of the Jews of Color Initiative, who challenges us to imagine a more expansive and inclusive Jewish community, one that reflects the full diversity of the Jewish people. And next to Ilana is Oren Segal, who is the vice president of the Center of Extremism at the ADL, who's going to ground us in the facts. What's happening right now with hate and extremism, how it's showing up in our politics and in public discourse, and what we can do about it. And as I said, he's going to need to leave to testify on Capitol Hill at 9:30. So nothing that is said is going to offend him. Probably at this point, almost nothing can offend you. You've heard everything, but he does need to go. The last thing I'll say before we jump in is on all of your tables are index cards and pens. This is your day much more than it is mine. So at any point, if you have any sort of question, I beg you to write them down on the index card and then lift up your hand with the index card. And a JCPA staff member will come and take the index card and bring it to me. And then about 45 minutes in, we will start asking questions from the floor. Otherwise, I will continue to answer my questions. They will get increasingly insipid as the hour goes on, and it will not be a good use of your time. Good? Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to start with questions for each of you individually, and then we'll go to questions for all of you. So, Oren, I'm going to start with you because it's probably some of the hardest stuff we're going to hear this morning, and I wanted to start with where we are right now. So, as I said, you have your finger on the pulse of where we are with anti-Semitism and extremism in this country. So what are some of the more urgent trends that you're seeing right now?
Yeah, everything's fine, actually. So thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here. When I was thinking about this question about the landscape of anti-Semitism and extremism, it occurred to me that, here we are at the Jewish Museum, and that, being at a Jewish museum, attending class, walking through Brooklyn, these are now acts of courage. And I think that kind of says it all about the landscape of anti-Semitism, where from across the ideological spectrum, we are seeing people who are normalizing and activating on, the types of hatred that we know have animated people to violence against our community for not just decades, not just, hundreds of years, but for millennia. And I think we're in a very diverse and complex threat landscape in this country, where we're also being asked to almost like choose sides between what is worse. The two questions I get more than anything else is A, is it safe to be Jewish publicly? And two is anti-Semitism worse on the left or on the right? And the first question is legitimate, and I appreciate it. The second question is stupid. But I also understand why people are asking that. I think effectively combating anti-Semitism and extremism in part means safeguarding it from political exploitation. And I think, thank you. I'll use that at that thing on the hill too. I think one of the realities is at the same time that we are trying to advocate for the seriousness of these issues, right? ADL has data showing, 9,000 plus anti-Semitic incidents of harassment, assault, and vandalism in 2024. There have been 16 terrorist plots and attacks against the Jewish community in the last few years. By the way, more than the last, 54 months before that combined. I mean, there's real data that shows that something is different, something is not normal. And yet, while we are trying to have people care about those issues, we're also trying to navigate the fact that, anti-Semitism is being used as a political football. And that almost like a Trojan horse from some, who are like, well, we're going to fight anti-Semitism, and here's all this other stuff that we want to throw into that at the same time, which frankly to me is a distraction of the important work of combating anti-Semitism. So, good times, right? But here's I think the last thing I'll say that I think is important. I actually don't feel hopeless. And by the way, I saw when you were up there and when I walked in, people are very emotional right now. I see it in the faces of many of the folks here. And I think a lot of people are also feeling hopeless. But I have the benefit of working for an organization. I know Amy is leading an organization where we're actually going to affect change. And, part of it is providing people with the research and the data. And I know I haven't gone into too many of the scary parts because it's early and I don't want you to vomit up your breakfast. But we have an opportunity to take the realities on the ground and to try to find allies and not quit on them, even if we feel like sometimes they have quit on us. Navigate government entities, even if they are more state and local than ever before, in order to help protect our communities and continue to speak truth to power, right? So at the end of the day, while my team of 50 investigators and analysts are spending most of their waking hours in horrible spaces to try to stop these activities from happening, we're all hopeful because there is success. And I know it's hard to imagine, but it could be so much worse, if not for the work of the folks on this panel, all of you, and that frankly means a lot more in the long run.
Can I ask you a follow-up, just because we're going to lose you to this room, in this space? But the connection between the rising anti-Semitism and the threat to democracy that some of us are feeling, we're experiencing at that moment, is that something that you see as connected, the rise of anti-Semitism and the sort of challenges that we have to democracy that Leslie was talking about earlier?
Sure. The more that democracy frays, the more that extremists and anti-Semites are emboldened and excited. That's always been the case. They rely actually on weak democracies in order to win hearts and minds, to impact people. So I think democracy and protecting democracy is a critical part of combating anti-Semitism. I do also want to note, though, that it's complicated because there's another entity that is at the core of so much of what we're seeing, which is the state of Israel. And I want to be clear, criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism. Full stop. I'm Israeli, by the way. So, I'm quite critical of Israel at times. But what we have seen is that the narratives that conflate the Jewish community, blame the Jewish community for the actions of the state of Israel. Look at where we are right now. They are dangerous and they are deadly. And unfortunately, we're seeing more and more of that. By the way, not just from the so-called left, but, I remind people that David Duke, remember that white supremacist? That's the one white supremacist anybody can name. He coined the term "no more wars for Israel." The anti-Israel narrative and the danger there is across the ideological spectrum, but there is something new and different about the normalization of targeting the Jewish community simply because they're viewed as proxies for the state of Israel. While that has always been true, never before have I seen terrorist organizations, literally Hamas, Hezbollah, PFLP, the Houthis that came out of nowhere, increasingly communicating their propaganda, communicating their ideas directly to an American public and a global public. And that's because we are on terribly dark spaces online where all your kids and all your friends are spending most of their time. Like, we have to understand that reality. And so I think what is new is the fact that so much of the anti-Semitism, 58% according to our audit, is really linked to issues and that people have with the state of Israel. And that is becoming more dangerous. And last point here, while that is true, and while we are going to viciously try to push back against that, we are never at ADL, and I know most people here, ignore the fact that the other extremists are still out there as well. And it's not a luxury that the Jewish community has to choose that question of left or right. We are going to go where the anti-Semitism and hate is, no matter where it is, and we are going to expose all the different ways in which that's normalized. And I think the Jewish community, more than any other, has to realize that the left-right debate, the only losers in that are us.
Well, I think that's true for a lot of the debates that the Jewish community ends up engaging, that we're the losers at the end. Anyway, Mark, talking about difficult moments, let's move on to HIAS. So let's talk a little bit about the work that HIAS is able to do in the current moment and the work that HIAS is not able to do. Like, what are the barriers in this moment? I assume there are many, given the approach to immigration of the current administration, and then what is able to happen.
Thanks, and I have to say, I hope I can hold it together during this panel because Oren already triggered me in talking about, how being Jewish now is an act of courage in it by itself, and it reminds me of Elie Wiesel's essay, my favorite piece that he ever wrote, called "The Refugee." Where he talked about righteous Gentiles and said righteous Gentiles did what they did because they were human. And woe to society when being human becomes an act of courage. And that's where we are right now. That's where we've been for some years now. HIAS has certainly been there since the massacre at the Tree of Life building in Pittsburgh. In terms of, I should just quickly say what HIAS's work is right now, because not everybody understands just how comprehensive our work is and how global it is. But HIAS's work, we've been working in 25 countries until recently to help refugees be safe where they are. And when we can't accomplish that for whatever reason, then we help them resettle to places like the United States and come to a safe third country. And in the United States, we rely completely on partnerships with Jewish family service agencies and congregations and welcome circles around the country to make sure refugees feel welcome. That work has, I wouldn't say come to a complete halt, but has been seriously interrupted. On January 20th, President Trump, as was expected, one of his first acts, suspended the entire refugee program. That did not take us by surprise. What did take us by surprise was on January 24th, when we and hundreds of other humanitarian agencies received stop work orders from the U.S. government telling us to stop assisting refugees here and outside of the United States, effective immediately, with no discussion, no planning, no damage control. This impacted 60% of our revenue and all of our work. What did we do in response to these two things? We sued. HIAS has filed 2 lawsuits against Donald Trump, and those are really actively being litigated and have already resulted in some positive steps. But let's face it, this is a battle of David and Goliath, and we're going to, this will be worthwhile because we will help save lives through these lawsuits, and that has already started to happen, but we're not going to save the program. We're not going to save U.S. leadership. Our partnership with the U.S. government is over for the foreseeable future. The good news is that wasn't how we operated for almost 100 years. We operated entirely by working with American Jews who wanted to help refugees, and that's our business model once again. So we will continue to help refugees. We will continue to welcome them. We will continue to do so in partnership with Jews around the country, even though we're going to be a shadow of our former selves because we have already laid off nearly 800 staff since January 20th as a result of these executive actions. And when we do receive funding from the U.S. government, which we are entitled to and which we have had to sue for, we also, just to add to this discussion, have to certify that we won't be spending any of it on any initiatives related to diversity or equity or changing or helping somebody change the sex that they were born with. Like literally, we have to certify that on for every single dollar that we receive now. But it's not going to stop us from welcoming people. We found other ways to do that. We are still welcoming Afghans who can come here, not because Trump didn't stop them, but because they can buy their own ticket with their approval notices, unlike 128,000 refugees who have approval notices from the U.S. government but can't come here on their own. And we'll also be helping asylum seekers, piloting our welcome circles to help welcome asylum seekers, and also the people who are here who are in danger of losing their status, and who will be losing their status for many of them: Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, and Afghans, and even Ukrainians. Thank you.
I just feel like we need to just take a breath before we go on. That's something that you live with every day, and it's incredibly painful. And we'll go on to you, Ilana. So in the last little bit of time, look, coalitions have always been messy. That's someone that anyone who's in this room who's a Jewish community relations professional or any sort of coalition building professional knows. They're never neat, they're never clean. Anyone who wants them to be that way is just living a lie. But I want to know, Ilana, right now, especially in this moment, but maybe over the course of all of your work, sort of what does it look like to actually build power through coalitions that are multiracial, multi-faith, even when they're messy, perhaps even in this moment? And how do we hold complexity and conflict that can arise when diverse communities try to pursue shared goals?
First of all, I want to appreciate Oren and Mark and Rabbi Shira for this conversation and for the JCPA for hosting it. I want to start off by saying I got a number of emails and communications from some of the colleagues in this room after our webinar with Amy last month about talking about strategies for coalition building. And a number of you said to me in the emails, the strategies are great, but my board or my funders or my whomevers will never let me approach the work like this. And what I want to say to you is, some of you said, Ilana, you can't imagine what it might be like to try to disrupt and agitate my funders and my leaders to compel them to make change. And I said, no, I do know what it's like. Having been a JCRC regional director by myself, navigating 1,000 square miles, 27 synagogues, day schools, JCCs. And so I want to say to you, the first part of coalition building in a time that is not normal is to not try to do it like we would do if it were normal. And so you need to center your courage, and you need to center the fact that you know the strategies that you're thinking about that are going to disrupt and agitate your funders, and maybe some of your board leaders are the right ones. And you have to be centered in the sense that you have to compel them to take a risk on your approach, because what we know is that the historical and current approaches are not working. And the cost of continuing to do business as normal when there is nothing normal about this time is not only the eroding of democracy, it's not only the eroding of the national fabric, but it will be the disintegration of this slowly integrating U.S. Jewish community. And so if we continue to do business as usual, we will go further to our side, whatever that looks like. But who will not be here is all of us. and all of the people we are in service to, because we all exist in the middle. And so a coalition strategy has to be to move from the binary to the middle, and to understand inside of that middle place is a technology, it's a pedagogy, it's an approach of adaptation that will be different and will be uncomfortable and will require you and will require your teams and it will require your colleagues to be in the most messy spaces, choosing to be there because there is nowhere else we can be. Our charge in this work is to do things differently than they do it outside. And so in terms of coalition building, when you feel like the allies have fallen short, when we feel like they haven't shown up, we have to, instead of saying we need to go back to our side or we need to cut them off, we need to go into that space and ask them why and what. We need to approach it with a sense of inquiry and a desire for understanding because we have fallen out of alignment. And I want to suggest that we've not been in alignment. And this idea that we've had allies is not really exactly right and true. What we've done is we've invested for a very long time in a strategy of trying to make people like us as Jews. And we wanted them to like us as Jews because we were fleeing anti-Semitism and we were fleeing hate and we wanted to blend into the background. And so it presumed we would be not disruptive. And it would presume we would be polite. And it would be presumed that we would blend in, but we can no longer blend in. We shed our visual attributes of Jewish identity to blend in, and what it's done has fallen us outside of relationship because people did not know we were them. And we did not know we were they. And so we need to be in the spaces where we don't understand, where we are upset, where we are hurt, where we are wounded, and we need to say, I am hurt, I am wounded, and I want to be in conversational relationship with you. We need to understand the history and the context. We need to understand, for example, why some perspectives on the civil rights movement may not be shared by all. And then we need to use, it's quite all right, thank you. We need to use that understanding to inform our strategies and next steps. We need to rethink history. We need to have conversations about where people did have access to privilege and power and rights and where we have marginalized others in service of keeping the Jewish community safe. We need to ask ourselves, when we've invested to help others, were we really creating a power dynamic that 20 and 30 years later in an ethnic studies program or in a diversity program on a college campus, we had actually engendered resentment and a sense of imbalance and not told the truth of the story so we cannot be in alignment when democracy is challenged and when white supremacy is coming after all of us. The last thing I want to say is every day when we choose this work, and I remember in 2016-17 during the last administration, my rabbi said to me, white guy, said to me, Ilana, like I've got congregants coming and calling and saying, should I not put my mezuzah on my door any longer? Should I not sort of proudly identify publicly as a Jewish person? What do you suggest that I say to them and that I do? My suggestion is that we develop deep comfort in publicly identifying as who we are all of the time. My suggestion is if we walk in public spaces and we talk in public spaces as we are, other people will hear us and they will see us and they will understand that they take the same risks we do and we as Jews take the same risks they do. There has been a historical imbalance in our ally building, and what we need to do is understand what the needs, the fears, the vulnerabilities, and the risks are, not of other communities, but other aspects of our own community that exist as part of other communities. And when we understand who we are in the middle, we can find strategy, we can operationalize that strategy, and we can advocate for that kind of coalition building.
Amen. Your questions are so wonderful, so please keep them coming. Before you go, I know. Do you want to just answer a question about
Sure.
whether all anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism before you go? Because it'll be easy. You can do it in 10 words or less.
I'm sorry, I have to go, but I want to do. I do. I will say this: the anti-Zionist movement has a real anti-Semitism problem, right? I mean, I think again, like when you look at the data that we have collected on anti-Semitic incidents, right? Not criticism of Israel. 58% of the 9,000 plus incidents of harassment, vandalism, assault, as I mentioned, included reference to Zionism and Israel. And so, I understand that people want to have legitimate conversations about Zionism and its role in society and sort of modern nation state building, whatever. Okay, fine. But anti-Zionism, the broader movement, there's a subsection of that movement that has a serious anti-Semitism problem, and that's what we need to focus on. One last thing I want to say before I jump away, based on, in part, what you were talking about. I do think there are ways in which we can, even in this moment, use what we do in order to build better relationships with others, because the Jewish community is unique in the sense that we have been targeted forever. And we have, how many different Jewish organizations are there? I don't even know what they all do. I just know they're all there, and sometimes I show up and speak at them, right? I don't actually know everything, but part of it is because we are used to being under attack. One of the things that we're doing at ADL is actually in the very focused way of combating violence and extremism. And by the way, information that we have provided to law enforcement has resulted in the arrest of 25 people before they were able to carry out attacks in the last 2 years, right? That's an effective way of keeping the community safe. I understand long-term, can't just arrest your way out of this conversation, but we have other organizations and other communities that are sending their best and brightest to the Center on Extremism in what we call an embed program. We give them access to our experts. We give them access to our tools. We train them on how to identify violence and extremism targeting their communities so that they can protect their communities, right? This is the Hispanic community, African-American community, AAPI community, LGBT community, by the way, the Jewish community. These are other communities that need to protect themselves in this moment in time, and we are teaching them how to do that. In some ways, you can't create a more effective and long-lasting bond than when you teach people how to protect themselves. So that is one of the things that I think we can continue to do. And down the line, since we know you can't really only hate one person or one community for a lot of these extremists, I think we all win. And so again, I just want to leave on a hopeful note. That's why I feel positive about what is happening behind the scenes, even though what you read in the press and what our politicians and pundits tell us seems like it's much worse than it is. Thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay, so thank both of you. Thank all of you. Thank you, Oren. And so now we're going to turn to sort of where we go from here and what we can do from here. So, as I said, we have some great questions, and the real underlying question for all of the following half an hour is what is the role of community relations pros and lay leaders in advancing strategies that support fighting hatred and building coalitions? I mean, that was your question, Ilana, and I just think it's a great one, and it's the underlying one. So, and these are some of the questions that you all wrote. I'm going to ask them to you all, and I hope that whenever possible, both of you can offer answers to them. This was one that was written specifically for you, Mark, but I'm sure, I feel like Ilana has Torah on almost anything, so I'm sure she'll have, something to say about this. But what can local focus organizations like JCRCs do to help change the status quo on federal funding in addition to reaching out to lawmakers? All of us get these emails 75,000 times a day. Reach out to your lawmakers, reach out to your lawmakers. Those of us who live in DC don't have that, but anyway, other people do. What else can we do?
We have to be out there as demonstrators. Reach out to lawmakers. I can't overemphasize that, even to those, and especially those that are friendly to these causes. They need to prioritize it. The strategy of flooding the zone is working extremely well right now, but we really need to be out there. What's interesting is if you look at the first Trump administration, people being out there on the streets, complaining, protesting, did make a difference, right? It did roll back a number of policies, the family separation policy. Eventually, refugees started being resettled again. I don't. We're starting to see that now. It's taken a little while because of the shock. I think it's really important to emphasize what is going on here. This is the Johnson-Reed Act was enacted down the street by Congress 101 years ago, imposing blatantly discriminatory immigration quotas meant to keep Jews and Italians and Eastern Europeans out of the United States and to make America white again. They'd already succeeded decades before in keeping Asians out of the country. I thought that was a historical relic and had no relevance. It's completely being done now, except it's not being done by Congress. It's being done by executive order. And the voices are just not out there protesting this, what's been analogized to the boiling of frogs, right? Like we're all frogs boiling in water and we don't even see what's happening to us. But that racist anti-immigration policy is exactly what's being implemented right now. And people are just more accepting of it than they were last time. When you look at what they have done already in the last few months, they have done a refugee ban. Nobody even knows about this. Last week, they rescinded all guidance helping stateless people get protection in this country. That didn't get any notice at all. Everybody seems to be accepting of the new travel ban because it doesn't just discriminate against Muslims, it discriminates against brown people too. And so therefore it seems to be okay. And everybody's accepting of that or is not making a lot of noise. No lawsuits have been filed yet against that particular clearly unconstitutional provision, though it is better than the first time when he actually called it a Muslim ban. And now the refugee program, good news, bad news. Bad news is that, yes, it was shut down entirely. Good news is he's opened it up a little bit. To whom? White Afrikaners. I mean, the only refugees that can come into this country right now with 128,000 approval notices for real refugees who have gone through a vetting process are white people from Africa. So this is the situation we are in. And if you don't think that there's racism that's completely motivating this policy, it's not safety, it's racism. And yet, where are the voices? Where are the objections to this policy? We're just not hearing it like we did 8 years ago.
So what I heard from you is flood the zone, contact your lawmakers, and go out into the streets and protest.
Exactly. We have to flood the zone too.
And lawsuits, right? Lawyers, like it was before, are our best allies.
Right.
Yeah.
And we can't do it by ourselves. We need to do it with others.
In coalition. Ilana, did you want to add anything?
I want to add just one piece, which is that I think we all have to remember as American Jews, U.S. Jews, Jewish Americans, however you identify, if you identify that way, that the safety and security that you might be holding on to, that you are not going to get snapped up in this immigration process, relies on the presumption and safety of whiteness. And it relies on the president and the administration buying into, but also reinforcing your sense of privilege, and that privilege somehow creates protection. And that's just not true. We are like one sort of sub-policy away from going back to when Jews weren't white in the United States. And you all might be, if you're not already, like one niece or nephew or grandbaby away of having a multiracial family. And so safety is liminal, and we have no control over it. And so I just want to further alarm all of us in the most loving way that we're talking about all of us. And it's just one late night decision that will take us back to when Jews were a category that were not favored, that were seen as the other, and then were restricted here in the U.S.
It's like, right. It's like, so if you can't push back against it because it's wrong to be racist towards other people, push back against it because it might be you one day. Right. Okay. Either one works. But can I just push a little bit? Is it okay? Because, some of you here know, I used to serve a synagogue here in Washington, D.C. So, where I was like the most right-wing person, in the whole synagogue community. And now I serve a synagogue out in Colorado where I am the most left-wing person. And I was just trying to listen to what you were saying through the ears of some of my new congregants, about 20% of whom voted for Donald Trump, right? And are proud of it. Right. To this day, they would say, like, I voted for him. Some of us put it on Facebook. Are you still happy you voted for him? Now are you happy? And they're all like, yeah, I'm still happy. Yeah, that's still. So, these are people, and one of you wrote about this in your card, like, to them, talking about democracy is partisan. And what they would say is that you are being hyperbolic, that you're creating a sort of the way that we would have said that about the right when Biden was president, when they were saying, and I guess my guess is many of you have board members who also feel that way in your JCRCs, because a lot of your federations are like, well, our JCRCs have to be balanced, across partisan lines to a certain extent. And so I guess, like, what's your response when you don't have a bunch of people who are clapping when you drop your Torah, in the room to that sort of, to those statements?
So last December, I was on assignment for work, and I drove from Raleigh, North Carolina to Sarasota, Florida. And I stopped all along the way. I was in Savannah, Georgia. I went to Mikveh Israel Synagogue, if anybody's ever been there. It was an extraordinary experience. I stopped in South Carolina. I did a lot of work in Florida, and I met a lot of people who fall into this category of questioning and challenging most of what I say. And in the Jewish community, when I have that experience, I take it as an invitation to bring somebody closer in to the community as we may see it in here. And I know that there's something about their life experience that makes us feel distant in that moment. As a community relations professional, it is my requirement to change my pedagogy in service of that conversation. And so fundamentally, I believe our role is different. And I believe by choosing the work that we've chosen, we're charged with approaching each person who pushes us back as an invitation to bring them in. And I understand that we are rewarded when people say things like, Ilana, that doesn't make sense. And I say things like, well, then you go this way and I go this way and everybody goes. I know we're rewarded right now for pushing people back into their corners and taking a stand in that way. And I wanted to say, let's reward each other for taking the risk of staying in conversation and bringing people in. And so I've made a point, and I'm like, if I had time to write a blog, I've made a point of having conversations with people who make me feel intensely uncomfortable. Like the young man in South Carolina who asked me a million questions about, do Californians really believe? And they were every stereotype and every scary negative thing I could have imagined. And then he said to me, it might be possible that the things I've learned are propaganda. Maybe it's not. And then we were able to have a conversation. And so I think we need to assume that people are going to push back. I think we're going to need to assume that people think that if I want to be in a relationship and build coalition, that they might receive that as a threat to what they have. And not to like your material privilege at this. People are talking about there's privilege, the safety. And anything that's perceived as a threat to safety is going to make people push back. And so change our pedagogy, change our approach, bring different tools and resources, and choose to stay in the conversation until the bridge is built. It is my job as a community relations professional to build the bridge and to activate it so that it can be crossed. I may not get to cross the bridge.
Can I just add that I completely amen to that. I completely agree with that. When I look back at the way HIAS responded to the first Trump administration, my one regret is that we rallied the troops, we rallied our base. Our interfaith work was extensive, but it consisted of working with other faith groups that agreed with everything, that agreed with us on almost everything, at least everything that we were fighting for. And that was a mistake. Like interfaith work has to encompass groups that really don't agree with you. And they're the ones who decided the last election, and who will decide our future if we don't restart that conversation.
Yeah. I think the challenge is, you know, as I learned community organizing, some of the work of community organizing is, um, I guess, old school is you ally with other groups on the issues that you can agree on, even though, and there are other issues that you might disagree on, like with every ounce of your being. But we are inhabiting a moment where the litmus test is the second that an organization, even if you're allying on position A, if they say something about position B, then you have to sort of cut them off entirely. And that's just not how, as I understand it, it's traditionally worked. And that's a real problem. Whether issue B is Israel or anything else, we're sort of cutting off our nose to spite our face in certain ways. I love this question. It is also my last of all the questions, guys. I'm going to have to go back to mine if I don't get more from you. What historical models or case studies of the intersection of anti-democratic and anti-Semitic and racist or homophobic impulses are you finding most useful or instructive in this moment? So it's basically, are there models or case studies of the intersection of anti-democratic and other impulses that are helpful in this moment to help us figure out how to move forward? Like what other groups did well, what they didn't, their failures. I really appreciated you talking about one of your failures or one of your mistakes. I wouldn't say failure.
I mean, I can start, but I think that the example that feels most potent in this moment, quite frankly, is during the Reagan era, the national lack of response to HIV/AIDS and the way the LGBTQ community literally acted up and queer nationed, and I'm going to use those as verbs even though they're proper nouns, to transform the conversation on queer rights in this country and transform not only the legislation around queer rights, but also the resources flowing at that time to fight HIV/AIDS. And I think what we need to remember is the way that transformed the country was in the streets. And it was people, and there's a parallel here. It was those who, up until that moment, did not identify as allies to the LGBTQ community, often because of issues of faith, who then finally, because somebody in their family was queer or had contracted HIV/AIDS, became a public spokesperson while the streets were rioting for transformative change. You saw mutual aid. So real-based technology, mutual aid, rioting in the street, protesting in the street, and people with resources and power coming out as allies. It was a multifaceted, multi-front response, and it required both disruption and comportment all at the same time. That would be an example that I think.
Yeah, and I'm going to Chicago right after this for the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs annual dinner, Acts of Change dinner, where I'm really honored that I'll be getting the Rabbi Robert Marks Social Justice Award, and which I don't deserve, but HIAS certainly deserves it for our work, and that's really where we have to look. Is that's where our greatest success was the alliances that were formed during the civil rights movement. And I'm so honored to be going there because those of you know the story of Rabbi Marks, who regularly worked very closely, marched with Dr. King. He had his epiphany in 1966 when there were protests going on in Gage Park against housing discrimination on the basis of skin color in that neighborhood. And Rabbi Marks was there to kind of try to make sure that things didn't get out of hand. And his main job at that protest was he sat on rocks so that counter-protesters wouldn't pick them up to throw them at peaceful demonstrators. But he immediately regretted that because he realized I shouldn't have just been sitting on rocks. I should have been marching with them. I should have demonstrated and taken the same risks that they were taking. And I mean, we really have to look to the civil rights movement. I think that's the best lesson for us to learn. And it's discouraging because when you go to the civil rights museums and where you read about it, you realize that was a struggle that lasted centuries and is still not over. But you see, that's where we made an amazing amount of progress in a relatively short period of time because of that alliance. And we can't overstate the importance of the Black-Jewish alliance in spite of the fact that we are a very, very tiny minority in this country.
Thank you. Just for Amy and Leslie and the JCPA, there are so many questions here that are, what do we do when our board members reject allyship as a concept? What do we do when our board members say democracy is too partisan to talk about? What do we do when our board members? So clearly that is a live topic for many of you out there in the community. Okay. Oh my God, you guys, this is so, no, do you guys want to talk about what's happening in LA right now with the protests happening? Do you have any insight beyond what Mark was saying about how important it is to go out into the streets? Is there anything there?
I think, so I'm a Californian. I will be flying home tonight back to the Bay Area, where we're also having ICE raids and protests. And so I'm a little bit, you're asking me at a time where I'm feeling a little bit anxious, if I'll be honest, about the energy traveling up north. This is a moment where kind of exactly what one of the things we've all been talking about is coming up to the top, which is kind of how much comfort and sort of liberal privilege are we willing to risk for the sake of the larger effort? And how much discomfort are we willing to endure, understanding that if we are not visible and are pushing back, then no one will know we care and that we're there. The real risk is that we may be arrested, we may be picked up, because at this point it's rather indiscriminate. The real risk is what it means to have the National Guard and Marines coming into your city, and understanding that at this point, because journalists have been injured in violence, that it's fairly indiscriminate. And California is a test case, I think, as many of us understand, for what might happen around the rest of the country. I know just from staying very close to the ground that many, many Jewish communities and allies and partners are in the streets together protesting, that at this point there has been an overall perspective that one's safety is fundamentally at risk. And I think there's this real question of a test of whether or not we think democracy is going to protect people just in terms of having the right to have your voice heard or being present in what that means. There's also a test around who's being picked up based on their background. And what we know is that can include any of us because we're all of us. I think we should be worried. I have not I have not seen this before, so but I think we should all be very worried. And at the same time, I think, at least for myself, I think there's a sense of feeling compelled to stand out and take a risk, despite the fact that even my own phenotype blends into the background of others. I have seen ICE raids firsthand in the last several weeks. I have seen it all firsthand in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so it's at our front doors. And I've not seen anything like it before, but I'm certainly processing it. We're thinking about it very strategically. And this is a moment where we're not out there. They don't know we're out there.
I want to ask two more questions and then we'll start to bring it to a close. The first is about the intersection between two Jewish impulses. The one which is like Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Bazeh, like all of Jews are responsible for each other. The fact that like we Jews, we take care of each other, we come first. We are still in a moment more or less of Jewish power in America, even though some may argue that we could fall at any time. But it's still holding. And then we also have this sort of universalist impulse, this idea that like, how can we be a Jewish people if we're not looking out for the other? And I think that there are some communities in which the universalist impulse needs to take priority because Jews have some semblance of power, at least the majority Jewish community, the white Jewish community, sort of a certain way of articulating it. And then there are some that are like, no, Jews watch out for Jews. That's what we do. And I wonder if you can respond to, whether you believe in one needs to take precedence over the other, or the interplay between the two, and whether and how they each show up in the current moment.
Sure. I mean, this is the important thing to emphasize, and we've learned this the hard way at HIAS since we had to work during the Holocaust trying to rescue people. When there was no right to asylum, there was no right to refuge. And we realized that we are a minority. Like, we are a minority, and if we only stand for ourselves, we will fail. Eventually, we will fail. And we may think we have power, but we're a minority, and it's tenuous. And that's why you look at human rights law, it's important for us not to stand up just for ourselves, but to stand up for the principles of human rights, that every person, every human being is created in the image of God, and that we have to fight for everybody's human rights, not just for our own. And this isn't a new concept from the 20th century, right? This dates back to Hillel, and probably well before that. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, who am I? And if not now, when? And that to me instructs everything that we do, and explains that there really isn't a tension between those two things. You have to stand up for yourself, but you also have to stand up for humanity, or we will fail.
And I think what I would add to what Mark said is that we're 2% of the population, 2.2%. It depends on what day we're talking about. And I was saying we are 2% of the population, 2.2%. It depends on what day we're talking about. And I believe one of the biggest challenges to the U.S. Jewish community is that we have allowed ourselves to wonder if we are particularist or universalist rather than understanding what it means to be here in the U.S. as Jews. And the physics of the United States demand that our community will continue to become more multiracial, more multicultural, more multi-faith. That's what the data tells us. That's what the physics show us. And so this struggle about are we them or are they us is irrelevant, because we're one. And I don't mean that in some sort of Pollyannish way. I mean that in like a scientific way. And so despite physics of integration and unity with binary thinking, and somehow thinking that thinking is going to save us as Jews, we have to go back to which Jews are we talking about? And that's just not us. And so I think we can have this debate about particularity versus universal identity as Jews. I'm much more interested in what it means when we understand ourselves as U.S. Jews, and what it means when we see ourselves in the diversity that we really are and are really becoming, and what kind of strategies we would employ, and what kind of paradigms we would see ourselves in if we understood ourselves that way. The last piece I want to add, just to be a tiny bit even more provocative, is I think as a Jewish community, we should be asking ourselves what it means to be an experiment of diasporic Zionism. And in the most loving way, I understand, as somebody who was raised in a Reform community, that I woke up into a context, as my 19-year-old would say, without giving consent, to participate in an experiment of diasporic Zionism. And we have to ask ourselves, as the thinkers in here, the wanderers, what does that mean? And what kind of physics have we created in this country as Jews, but not only as Jews, the rest of the country who is participating in this experiment of diasporic Zionism as taxpayers? It's got us in a situation where there is tension. And we need to grapple with out loud that tension in the safety of a space like this, where we can interrogate what it means and figure out what is our collective identity rather than a particular or a universal identity.
Oh gosh, I feel like, all right, you each have 30 seconds to answer a final question. Even though now I want to talk for an hour about diasporic Zionism. How do we hold a little bit of resilience right now? I feel like this question, we've been asking it since 2016, and now it's 2025. How do we stay resilient in moments like this? Just like really quickly.
I would say we have to exhibit small acts of kindness in our everyday life. I was in the Rio Grande Valley a couple of years ago, and I was at a grocery store, and the cashier from her accent was clearly from somewhere else, from another country. And the person in front of me actually asked the cashier, she said, "Where are you from?" And the cashier said, "Guatemala." And the person in front of me said, I want to just thank you for coming to our country and for being here. You know? And I was so blown away by that. And I think, it's really carried me along. It's small things like that, I think, that can really make a difference and carry us through.
I agree with what Mark just said, and want to emphasize the importance of putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations where we are in direct dialogue with people who are different than us, or we think are different than us. And I don't think it'll take long to find the middle common ground, but to work towards that common ground. And I'm going to take a risk and give you a share. I've been not terrified, but I've been uncomfortable since 2016. And I recently took, and I'm just going to share this in the company of Israel, a women's firearm safety class. And I know it's very controversial to say it out loud, but I think it's really important to say it out loud. And I took it from a Black woman. It was all women's class, and we were at a range where this all takes place. And I was afraid to be there. I was afraid of who I thought would be there. I had all kind of stories in my mind. And I'm learning how to handle the firearm. And there's a range safety officer who comes by, and he's like a white guy, and he looks kind of unshaven and kind of rough or whatever. I don't know. And he's in a conversation with somebody else, and I hear him say, "I'm really sorry about what happened in Colorado." And I look over at this guy, and he's got a tag on his neck. And I just kind of look at him and grin at him. And then about 20, 30 minutes later, it's almost 12 noon, and he says, "Just turn around and I want you to meet my family." And I'm like, "I don't know this guy." And I turn around, and there's an Asian woman behind me, and her JOC, or Jew, their daughter, who's like 8 years old, out on the range. And what I see in front of me are our community right in front of us. People who are trying to help us in a space I am intensely uncomfortable and kind of scared to be in. And all around me is us. Our Jews of color, our people of color, our people to build community, and people who want to keep us safe. And so let's go to the most uncomfortable spaces and take the biggest risks we each can take and find our people there, and then build relationships with them.
Well, thank you both so much for all the ways that you carry our community. And thank you, all of you, for being here and for caring for our community in so many different ways.